the line everyone thought they crossed, but never actually did. Intro. The line people love to draw. Every fandom, every audience, and every era of entertainment has an invisible line it loves to draw. A line between professional and personal. A line between acting and feeling. A line between chemistry and something more. And once a pairing becomes compelling enough, that line becomes the center of attention. For Freen and Becky, that line has been discussed, debated, dissected, and redefined more times than anyone can count. Some were convinced they crossed it. Others insisted they never did. And many couldn't even agree on where the line was supposed to be in the first place. But here's the quiet truth that often gets missed. They didn't cross the line. They changed how people understood it. Where the confusion began. The confusion didn't start with a dramatic moment. It started with something far simpler. From their earliest scenes, Freen and Becky didn't behave like two people trying to manufacture closeness. They behaved like two people who already shared it. There was no visible adjustment period. No awkward phase where chemistry needed to kick in. They were comfortable immediately. And comfort, in an industry built on performance, is often mistaken for intimacy. Audiences are used to seeing actors build chemistry. When they see chemistry that appears fully formed, they assume something must be happening behind the scenes, because that's the only framework they've been given to explain it. So the questions began. Is this still acting? Is this professional? Is this appropriate? But those questions say more about expectation than reality. The moments that made people pause. There were moments that fueled speculation, not because they were explicit but because they were subtle. The way Freen instinctively positioned herself between Becky and chaos. The way Becky leaned in without hesitation. The way their eye contact lingered just a second longer than expected. The way silence never felt empty when they shared it. None of these moments were dramatic. None were inappropriate. None violated any boundary. But they felt intimate, and that feeling unsettled people who are used to clear, visible separations. When affection isn't loud, people look for rules to explain it. When connection isn't labeled, people rush to label it themselves. Why people thought a line was crossed. The belief that they crossed a line came from one assumption. That professionalism must look distant. But professionalism doesn't require coldness. It doesn't require emotional detachment. And it certainly doesn't require pretending connection doesn't exist. Freen and Becky didn't blur professionalism with romance. They blended professionalism with respect, trust, and emotional intelligence. They listened to each other. They adjusted to each other. They protected each other's comfort. For some viewers, that level of attunement felt too personal to be allowed. But the problem wasn't their behavior. It was the narrow definition of what professionalism is supposed to look like. The line was never where people thought it was. The real line in professional relationships isn't about closeness. It's about consent. It's about mutual comfort. It's about respect. And on that front, Freen and Becky were always aligned. They didn't push moments for the camera. They didn't exploit intimacy for attention. They didn't escalate behavior when it made the other uncomfortable. If anything, they were careful. They checked in with glances. They softened when needed. They pulled back when situations required it. That's not crossing a line. That's honoring one. Why natural connection feels threatening. There's another uncomfortable truth beneath all of this. People are far more accepting of exaggerated intimacy than they are of genuine connection. Big gestures feel safe because they look scripted. Quiet understanding feels risky because it looks real. Freen and Becky didn't rely on dramatic cues to signal emotion. They relied on presence. And presence is harder to categorize, harder to control, and harder to dismiss. So instead of asking, "Is this respectful?" people asked, "Is this allowed?" And that question reveals the fear behind the fascination. The difference between crossing a line and standing near it. Standing near a line isn't the same as crossing it. Freen and Becky stood near it often, not because they were careless, but because their connection naturally lived there. They didn't step over. They didn't erase boundaries. They simply refused to exaggerate distance to make others comfortable. They trusted each other. They trusted their dynamic. They trusted that authenticity didn't need defending. And that confidence unsettled people who expect constant disclaimers. Why time proved them right. Time has a way of clarifying things. If a line had truly been crossed, cracks would have appeared. Discomfort would have surfaced. Distance would have grown. Instead, what audiences saw was consistency. The same ease. The same respect. The same quiet awareness of each other. No escalation. No retreat. No shift that suggested something had gone wrong. That steadiness told a story louder than any interview answer ever could. What they actually showed us. What Freen and Becky demonstrated wasn't boundary crossing. It was boundary maturity. They showed that two people can share deep understanding without explanation. That trust doesn't need performance. That care doesn't need labels. And that professionalism doesn't mean pretending connection doesn't exist. They modeled something rare. A relationship that didn't need to prove itself to anyone. Conclusion: the line was ours, not theirs. In the end, the line everyone talked about wasn't one Freen and Becky crossed. It was one the audience projected. Projected expectations. Projected discomfort. Projected assumptions about what connection is allowed to look like. Freen and Becky didn't break rules. They quietly exposed how fragile some of those rules were to begin with. And maybe that's why their connection stayed with people so deeply. Not because it crossed a line, but because it showed how unnecessary that line might have been all along.